Hello and welcome to this session brought to you by Veeam Software, Microsoft Teams Backup, 8 Facts You Need to Know. I am your host, Edward Watson, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Veeam, and I'm really excited to talk to some expert speakers today on 8 different facts to help you understand the what, why, and how of Microsoft Teams Backup. But before I introduce our speakers, I do want to invite you to share with us where in the world you're from. So please put in the chat here where you're joining us from. We'll be adding our viewers' countries to this world map, and we'll be sharing that from time to time, and do hope we have it pretty well filled out by the end. So again, please say hello, tell us where in the world you're joining from. You can see already that the map is starting to fill out from the presenters and the Veeam team on the call today, myself in Arizona, some of the team in Georgia, Ohio, St. Petersburg, and Romania, and a few of my guests in South Carolina and London, UK. We're also going to be taking a poll during the session. So the question for the poll is, do you back up Office 365? And you can either answer yes, no, or I use native Office 365 capabilities. So we'll be looking back at the poll results throughout the presentation. So please participate in that by selecting one of the icons you see listed. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelist speakers today. Archana Venkatraman is the Associate Research Director of Cloud Data Management at IDC Europe. Archana's primary research coverage focuses on cloud data management, but she covers multiple topics related to data protection, the cloud, and data trends. Archana is also the co-lead of the cloud practice and an active contributor to IDC Europe's DevOps and AI research practices. Thank you very much for joining us, Archana. We also have, thanks a lot, Archana. We also have Brian Posey, who is a 19-time Microsoft MVP and commercial astronaut candidate. Brian is a well-known writer and speaker in the IT industry. Prior to going freelance, he held many positions such as CIO for a national chain of hospitals and healthcare facilities, and as a lead network engineer for the United States Department of Defense at Fort Knox. He has worked as a network admin for some of the largest insurance companies in the US. Welcome, Brian. I do want to ask you, what sort of space mission are you preparing for?
Hey, thanks for having me. The mission is going to be to study polar mesospheric clouds from space.
Great, that's fascinating. Quite the second occupation you have there. We also have Corinne Bessette. Corinne is a technologist at Veeam Software within the product strategy team. She has a strong technical background in network and security with certifications across many platforms. She spent the last few years laser focused on the Office 365 backup space. Thanks for joining us as well, Corinne.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so with that, perhaps we'll look back at the map later on in the session, but again, please tell us where you're from. We're very interested in filling out that map. So let's go ahead and dive right into the panel questions here. And really, let's kick it off with our first fact around Teams, which is that really Microsoft Teams is being adopted at a very tremendous rate. What can you tell us about that adoption that we're seeing for Teams, Archana?
Yeah, a big shout out from my side as well to all the listeners. Thank you for joining us. Yes, Edward, I mean, Teams is part of broader Microsoft 365, and on a broader scale, that suite overall, Office 365 suite adoption is accelerating at a really rapid pace. I mean, if you look at the latest quarterly results from Microsoft, the revenues for Office 365 grew 21% in the last quarter. If you look at what customers are using Microsoft 365, it's really Teams that is the hero application. It's integral to their work. And Microsoft Teams has crossed 115 million daily active users. And if I remember correctly, I spoke to you this time last year, and at that time, there were about 44 million users for Teams. That was March 2020. So we were in millions already, and look at the scale of growth. It's more than doubled in 1 year. And at that scale, it's really a huge amount of accelerated growth. And I was just talking to a French CTO last week, and he told me how, before the crisis, just 30% of their employees were using Teams environment. but today more than 90% of them use it. And some organizations have more than 100,000 people relying on that Teams environment. And Teams is all over the place, even in heavily regulated industries such as the healthcare. So the NHS team in the UK, there are about 1.3 million employees that are collaborating on Teams environment. And it's not just the broader Office 365, but Teams is central to what they do in delivering better patient outcomes and just managing this vaccine rollout and all that. So it's absolutely critical for their day-to-day productivity. So whether it's continuing business as usual or increasing collaboration or enabling that digital workspace, Teams is central. But what we are also beginning to see is that Teams is used for driving innovation, business process modernization, knowledge sharing. I was just talking to a company that said they're using Teams for, simple use cases like expenses approval, document peer review, ideas brainstorming. All of those core things are happening in the Teams environment. So we're beginning to see that Teams is really at the core of this future of digital work. And we're hearing from Office 365 customers how they're even co-authoring content. So they're creating and sharing data as well as tracking data directly within Teams. And if you look at what Microsoft itself is doing, they're putting Teams at the center of their innovation as well. So they're bringing the Power Platform closer to the Teams environment. So now there is low code, no code data, there's configuration data, all that in that Teams environment as well. And Microsoft is even adding additional components like Microsoft Viva within the Teams environment, where you can look at a lot more data sources. You can bring in data from other external applications like ServiceNow and Salesforce and deliver knowledge. So it's becoming that hub for knowledge sharing and collaboration and data creation. So it's really at the center of what the companies are doing, and the adoption is accelerating. It's changing how people are working.
Yeah, great. And excellent points, Archana. Fact number 3 is, in addition to that growth, there are actually more and more different reasons people are considering to back up Teams. Archana, from your research, what are some of the most challenging areas that you've identified for reasons they want to back up Office 365 and Teams?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, we just spoke about the accelerated adoption of Office 365, right? I mean, what are applications without data? The value of applications really is in the data. So we're beginning to see that the data footprint within this Teams environment and Office 365 environment is growing rapidly as well. And a couple of years ago, we've been looking at SaaS data protection. It was never so high on the radar for the C-suites. But now, in our latest data protection or multi-cloud data management survey, we specifically asked, what are your key data protection challenges or concerns? And the 3 things that stood out on top were SaaS data protection, so software as a service applications like Microsoft 365. And there was ransomware across the board for all the applications, including SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, wherever your applications are, or whether they're on premises as well, and compliance. So compliance, data protection for software as a service, and ransomware. Those were the 3 of the topmost data protection challenges that companies said that's worrying them or that's keeping them awake at night. And if you looked at it, 18 months ago, SaaS was nowhere on the radar. So these challenges are rising up on the agenda because of the increasing use of software as a service like Office 365. And we keep talking a lot about digital resiliency and data resiliency, right? So if you cannot secure the data wherever it is and make it available and ensure compliance and availability at all times, it's difficult to deliver that digital resiliency and adapt to newer disruptions. So that's why it's extremely important to make sure that you consider backup for Office 365 environment.
Absolutely. So Brian, did any of those reasons resonate with you, or the challenges resonate with you, or any of those stand out at all?
Oh, I would completely agree with everything that was just said. I would add a couple of other things to that. A couple of other reasons why you might want to consider backing up Microsoft Teams. 2 things. One, I learned a long time ago that just as a best practice, it's a good idea to back up all of the data that you got, even if you consider it to be unimportant. because Murphy's Law dictates that the minute you consider something to be unimportant and you lose it, that's when you need it. So it's good to have a backup. The other thing that I tend to think about is that I kind of view Teams as being a lot like the way that Outlook was 25 years ago. Back then, the internet was just starting to catch on, and Microsoft was pushing Outlook really hard. That was the application that they envisioned everybody spending their entire day in. And if you think about how much mission-critical data we have stored away in Exchange and accessible through Outlook today, that's what Teams is becoming. Teams is, if it's not already, going to be the application that everybody spends the bulk of their day in. And it's not just an application. It's got tons of data associated with it, and that data needs to be protected, whether that's for regulatory reasons or just for a matter of ensuring business continuity.
Absolutely. Yeah, great points, guys. So we do have this world map that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and we actually did see quite a few countries come in already, some actually very surprising countries here. So we have South Africa, we have Sweden joining us, we have UK, Germany, Seattle, Canada, Missouri, Norway, New Jersey, Pittsburgh. We have Luxembourg, Slovakia, we have Switzerland, France, Italy, California, Ohio. We have the Czech Republic, Panama. We have Sweden, Israel, Ireland, Denmark, Texas, Mexico, Scotland, Oregon. We have a wide range of places, regions, countries. Very, very great to see all of you joining us from all around the world. I'm always surprised when I see the results from our viewership. So thanks for joining us. And again, if you haven't added to this map yet, we want to paint this map green, guys. So let's go ahead and get your country added. Okay, so we've covered a lot about the reasons, some of the growth in Teams. Obviously, there's a lot of organizations that are still using native Office 365 capabilities, built-in Teams retention, things of that nature. So fact number 3, many organizations still rely on those native backup capabilities, those native O365 capabilities. Can you elaborate on that, Archana? Those individuals and them using those native capabilities?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Edward. And I've spent a lot of time looking at this piece of research for the last 12 months and see how it is evolving. So IDC's research from a few months ago reveals that dedicated Microsoft 365 backup is really lagging. Only 23% of users that we spoke to rely on dedicated third-party backup designed for that Microsoft environment to cover all the applications, whether it's SharePoint, whether it's Teams, whether it's your Exchange. So it's and Teams is so much more important, right? So Office 365 is much more than email. So you need to make sure you back up all the other components of your Office 365 suite as well. An overwhelming majority of users are either relying on native or default backup capabilities. Shockingly, even a small percentage admitted to not even think about it or even be aware of the options that they have. And when we delved a little bit deeper, what we found was that there is this gap emerging between savvy users or digitally mature organizations that are working towards digital resiliency. They get the value of third-party backup, whereas those that are slightly behind in their digital maturity curve, they are not considering Office 365 backup. They think that Microsoft, although it's a great starting point, and Microsoft delivers all the security capabilities and great levels of availability, it's still not its core competency. But a lot of people believe that all their data responsibilities have been taken care of because it's a different kind of arrangement, right? Software as a service is very different from what they're used to buying for their on-premises environment. So they think everything is taken care of. Whereas when you look at Microsoft's own service agreements, they are recommending organizations or users to back up their data using third-party services. So it's quite interesting that our research shows that only 23% of users are actually investing in third-party backup. And we did the same survey back in 2019. When 4 in 10 organizations were using dedicated Office 365 backup. So the gap of actually people adopting dedicated data protection for this Microsoft 365 environment has actually widened or not kept pace with the growth of Office 365 adoption itself.
Yeah, absolutely, Archana. Brian,
yeah. It would also be good to see if we have some of the poll results to see what our users are saying. So please let us know if you are using backup or not.
Yes, absolutely. And Brian, do you have any thoughts on a user using things like retention policies or litigation hold instead of maybe a traditional backup copy?
Yeah, absolutely. Short answer is it's a bad idea, but both of those features have their place. Retention policies are more of a convenience feature than a backup substitute, though. Typically, when you delete an object within Microsoft 365, whether we're talking about something in Teams, a user, or what have you, it's not truly deleted. It is recoverable for a period of time, often 30 days. But that's assuming that you realize within that amount of time that you need to recover that object, and it's also assuming that the object wasn't permanently deleted. But the big problem with using that type of retention capability is that it offers very limited protection. For example, it will protect you if somebody accidentally deletes something, but it won't protect you if something was maliciously changed or permanently deleted, or if you've had a ransomware attack or something like that. As far as litigation hold goes, what litigation hold does is when you apply it to a mailbox, it retains all of the items within that mailbox in case discovery needs to be performed for litigation purposes. But what that means is that once you apply a litigation hold to that mailbox, it's preserving everything in there, including all of the spam, all of the phishing email messages. So you've got a huge amount of data that you suddenly have to sort through if you ever have to call on that. The other thing to think about is that if you ever have to do a restoration and you're using litigation hold as a backup substitute, that restoration is going to be super messy because first you have to give somebody the appropriate permissions to get to the data. Then they have to go in, find the data, export all of that to a PST file, and then all of that data has to be merged from the PST file into the user's mailbox, assuming that we're talking about email recovery. So the point being that using litigation hold as a backup substitute can be super messy, and it's not always the most reliable thing.
Great. Yeah, thanks for your insight there as well, Brian. We are getting quite a few questions, so keep your questions coming in. I think, Corinne, we might have a good question that you can answer here. It's from Jelani. What is the solution we are discussing here? Is it on cloud again? Can I have it on-prem? Perhaps just give us a quick teaser for VBO before we do the conclusion at the end.
Yeah, Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 can be deployed really anywhere that makes sense to your business, whether on-prem, in the cloud as an IaaS service, to back up your software as a service platform. It isn't a software as a service backing up a software as a service. It's an infrastructure as a service or an on-prem to back up to the SaaS offering.
Great. Okay. Sounds good. Again, keep those questions coming in. And again, if you haven't told us where you're from, please go ahead and let us know where you're coming in from. So with that, let's get to fact number 4, which is not having dedicated Teams data protection is a risky strategy. Why do you think this is a risky strategy, Archana?
Yeah, and Brian covered some of the points really well around the risks that's included in here. And Brian, the point you made about litigation hold was so valid. I've spoken to a lot of companies who depended on that and really faced those exact same problem, like how messy it was, how time consuming it was to recover that data. So it isn't equivalent to backup. And from my point of view, if you look at the risks, it falls into 3 main categories. The first one is data loss and security breaches. SaaS services or Office 365 is no exception to cyber attacks, right, or security breaches. So it's vulnerable to internal threats as well as external threats. So there's external threats like ransomware and other cyber attacks. And there's also internal threats, and Brian mentioned like accidental deletion, but sometimes accidental deletions go unnoticed for a long time. And then by the time you realize that you have accidentally deleted that data, it's long gone and you can't retrieve it. So So it's important to protect yourself from those kind of whether internal deletions, accidental deletions, or even external threats. And cyber attacks have really surged in this pandemic. And I was reading this report where I found that between February and April, immediately at the time when all this lockdown was announced last year, and there were huge amounts of endpoint devices, cyber attacks increased 238%. So it's a huge amount of increase that we're talking about here. And our research shows that more than 50% of organizations have experienced an unrecoverable data event in the last 18 to 24 months. And that's a cardinal sin, right? When we are talking about this digital age, if data is your currency, losing that is no good, because it's going to affect the brand, it's going to affect the digital trust of the organization, and it frankly is going to bring you back 2 steps in your digital transformation strategies. So while there is no silver bullet for ransomware, having this backup is a great way to improve your resiliency or boost your capabilities to recover quickly from any kind of security risks. The second point is really around data retention and compliance. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned at the beginning around how even regulated industries are adopting Teams and Microsoft 365. So if you look at the default retention policies, it doesn't meet the stringent requirements of some of these regulated industries. So if you want long-term retention and you want to avoid that kind of compliance risks and exposures, it's very important to have a backup policy. That's just good practice to make sure that it meets your governance and compliance standards that you have set for your own organization. And the third point is around this concentration risk and having that single point of failure. If you're looking for business continuity and better resiliency, it's important to minimize your reliance on a single provider, and backup can enable you or give you that flexibility to retrieve the data and have that flexibility for granular search and recovery as well that you don't get in a default backup service. So those would be the broad 3 risks that companies are taking when they don't consider backup.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for sharing those 3 risks. Brian, any thoughts that you have on not having a dedicated Teams? Why not having a dedicated Teams data protection strategy in place is risky for organizations?
Yeah. I totally agree with everything that's already been said. The 2 things that I would quickly add to that is, one, you've also got to think about the potential for accidental data modification, not just accidental deletion, overwriting good data with bad and then not catching it until later on. That's something that only a backup is going to help you to recover from. You're not going to be able to rely on any of those native recovery capabilities to get that good data back. Another thing that I think about, and maybe this is a little bit different than the types of things that have been talked about, is just peace of mind. As IT pros, we're constantly wondering, or maybe it's just me that wonders this, but what have I missed? What do I need to be doing to further ensure the integrity of my data and ensure ongoing operations of my organization? And having that dedicated backup strategy can help to bring that peace of mind. It's just one more thing that you don't have to worry about.
Absolutely. And we don't have to look as far as the news to see that there are some clear risks. And we did actually see that there was an outage that caused Teams files to become missing. And many of them were recoverable from the recycle bin. This is still a developing story. But again, to your point, Brian, Murphy's Law, things that bad things can happen. So, whether it's an accidental deletion or whether it's an outage or really any possible threat. Corinne, how could Veeam mitigate the risks that we've talked about thus far? How could Veeam Backup for Office 365 and those capabilities take care of some of the risks that we've talked about?
So with Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365, you're taking control back of your data. And when you take control back of that data, It means that you're not reliant on that shared responsibility model that you have with Microsoft, where you are responsible for that long-term retention versus being in control of saying like an on-prem environment, moving it over to an object storage, creating a separation of data from your primary environment following a true 3-2-1 type of scenario.
Excellent. Great point. Archana, we always hear about the shared responsibility model, or many of us do. Fact number 5 is that Office 365 is a shared responsibility, right? So what exactly, Archana, for those that aren't familiar with the Office 365 or Microsoft's shared responsibility model, how would you explain that to those that aren't aware what that is?
Interesting, and I'm so glad you brought up that topic, right? Because cloud services are so easy to adopt, and you can offload so much of your responsibilities to the cloud provider that it's sometimes easy to forget what you yourself are responsible for. And the whole model of cloud works only when you understand this shared responsibility model well and live up to your expectations around what your responsibilities are. So whatever services you use, whether it's cloud or on-premises, the ultimate responsibility for data, retention, information policies, identities, all that solely lie with the customer or the user. So the infrastructure responsibility is the only one that is transferred to the cloud or the SaaS provider. So just to delve a little bit deeper into what Microsoft is responsible for, I would say Microsoft is responsible for that cloud infrastructure, the uptime of Microsoft 365 services, the SLAs, the availability, the data center to data center geo redundancy, and having that little bit of basic data replication features such as those, and having that recycle bin feature for short-term data loss recovery. They are also a data processor, so they have those industry certifications for compliance and some regulatory controls and functions in place, and they have robust security, right? They have application level security, they have logical security and controls for users and administration. But when it comes to the users, the business data is absolutely the user's responsibility. So all the data that is within these environments, whether it's Teams or SharePoint or any of those applications within the Office 365 suite, and backup and data retention is also a user's responsibility. So do you have a copy of data stored outside the environment? Do you have point-in-time recovery options? Do you have granular recovery capabilities? All those are the questions that you need to ask yourself and give answers to it yourself, because you are responsible for those. And ultimately think of yourself as a data owner. So the legal responsibility is with you. So you have to work with the compliance team, and you need to meet the requirements of the corporate and industry regulators and the governance teams, and give them all the audit reports and all that. So as a data owner, it's your responsibility. And security functions when it comes to protecting data, like protection from accidental deletion or ransomware or some kind of rogue applications touching these, it's all the user's responsibility. So consider it as logical, application level, and infrastructure level responsibility as that of the cloud providers, and anything to do with the business data as your responsibility. And then automatically you will start thinking about, okay, how do I protect it? I need backup for that peace of mind factor.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to see the light bulb come on, Archana, when users start to see that, wait, whose responsibility is it? Well, it's actually mine as the admin or CIO. The responsibility of the data falls on the IT organization. So it's always good to see the light bulb come on when they see that, or when they hear that being described by yourself. So with that, we're going to get a little bit techie now. We're going to look at Teams on the back end. So fact number 6 is actually that Teams is not a self-contained application. Can you explain what that means, Brian, not being a self-contained application?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that Teams isn't a self-contained application represents something of a shift in the way that Microsoft has been doing things lately. Just to give you a couple of examples, just prior to this panel discussion, I was working on something that I was writing, and I was using Microsoft Word. Word is what I would consider to be a self-contained application. I write the document, I save it to a docx file, I save it out to my hard drive. that one file is associated with the application. I know where my data is. I click on that file, Word opens, it opens the document. The same thing has historically applied to Microsoft Server applications. I consider Exchange Server, for example, when it's running on premises, all of the Exchange or all of the mail and the calendaring information and the tasks are all stored in the Microsoft Exchange Information Store, which resides on the Exchange Server. The same thing applies to SharePoint. SharePoint doesn't store its own data, but it stores it in a SQL Server database when it's running on premises. So those are all self-contained applications. Now, Teams is kind of a different animal because rather than having one place where it stores its data the way that Exchange or SharePoint or Word or other applications do, Teams kind of scatters its data all over the place. And I think that what originally happened was that Microsoft decided that there was no need to reinvent the wheel and come up with a new way of storing data just for Teams. They could utilize what had already been built, and that would allow them to innovate more quickly. And this isn't just unique to Teams. Some of the other Microsoft 365 applications do the same thing. For example, Planner. It's not one of the more heavily used Office 365 applications, but it does the exact same thing. It stores data in a variety of different repositories. But with regard to Teams, I won't go into all of the different places where Teams stores data, but just to give you a couple of examples, one-on-one chat data gets stored within a hidden mailbox folder in Exchange Online. Files that you've shared with other people are stored in OneDrive for Business. And if you happen to record a meeting, that recording gets stored in Streams. So those are just a few of the places where Teams stores data. The point being that Teams isn't self-contained. It does store its data in a variety of different locations. And so you have to protect all of those locations.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that, Brian. We're going to take a quick break and look at the world map here. We've been getting your countries, and you've been sharing with us where you're from in the world, and we have some new countries that are populated here. So we have Portugal, we have Nigeria, we have Mozambique, Poland, Belgium, we have Brazil, Argentina, Lebanon, Kenya. So again, it just always surprises me where in the world we get our viewers from. It's always great to see that we have great global representation in terms of our viewers. So again, we appreciate you joining in from all over the world. Now, Brian, great take on how Teams is not a self-contained application. And I think that drives into really fact number 7, which is that there has really become, with this evolution and how Teams works, there's become a legacy method of Teams backup. Can you explain why that might be, Brian, that shift in going from legacy to modern Teams backup?
Sure. It has to do with the APIs that Microsoft makes available. Early on, Microsoft made APIs available for backing up Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive because those were the main components of Microsoft 365 that people were using. And a lot of the other Microsoft 365 applications store data in those 3 applications. So if you back those up, you were essentially backing up everything else. But with Teams, it tends to be a lot more complex than some of the other applications like Planner and things like that. So if you have to do a Teams restoration using a legacy backup application that is only designed to back up Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, you're going to have to do a lot of looking around for your data. For example, you might go to Azure Active Directory to restore the group that corresponds with a particular team. You might go elsewhere to recover a file that goes with that team. More recently, however, Microsoft has released an API that's specifically for Teams. And if a backup application incorporates that API, then that makes the process of backing up Teams and recovering Teams a lot simpler than it would otherwise be using a legacy backup method.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that folds very nicely into fact number 8, and actually our final fact of the 8 facts, and that is that not all Teams backup solutions are created equal, and certainly Veeam is leveraging that new Microsoft API you mentioned, Brian. So Corinne, what are some of the differences that really makes the Veeam the leader when it comes to Office 365 and Teams backup, leveraging that modern Teams data protection?
Well, to start off, we've been doing backup of Microsoft products for a long time before they were even in the cloud environments, and creating all of these advanced developed products for different types of restores to the infrastructure. So we're not just getting in and starting out this process. We are building on our Microsoft background to get into these cloud applications, building out specified and explorers for each individual application so the data you're restoring makes sense to those applications. And just like Teams was not a self-contained application, we're able to back up all of those backends and have been originally able to back up all of those backend data entities before the abstraction layer through the Teams API was offered. But as soon as that Teams API was offered, we were able to go in and start backing up integrated data into Microsoft Teams. So far, we have Teams themselves, and we haven't expanded to private channels yet. But within the Teams application and Exchange Online and SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business, we restore data not just in raw data formats, but in formats that make sense to the type of data that we're restoring. With the way that we back up and restore data, we don't have any type of ingress cost into the cloud. If you deploy in the Office 365 environment as an IaaS service, you're able to back up to an infrastructure as a service application, back it up to an object storage, all within the same backbone, which even mitigates egress and ingress costs from the object storage itself. So there's many different types of deployment options. And what really sets us ahead is we don't lock you into any type of storage. If you've done backup with our software before, you're not locked into not having your backups at the end of that cycle. If at the beginning of your cycle, it makes sense to have it on-prem install, but over time, you're wanting to go to a cloud-first initiative, you're able to migrate that data seamlessly to a cloud environment or back down onto an on-prem environment if a regulation includes into your infrastructure that you need to do that now. The sheer flexibility has made us the number one deployed out there on the market, and the granularity and restore, there is no comparison in any other product. On the subject of restore, we also have an advanced search option that searches more fields from the metadata that we've backed up from each of these infrastructures than I could probably personally name existing in those infrastructures, just to have that granularity out to the end user.
Great. And I think you covered actually most of the questions we'd received within that one paragraph there. But great. I really do appreciate all of the guests joining us today. We do actually have our poll results. So we asked at the beginning of the presentation, do you back up Microsoft Office 365? And the answers were 50% said yes, they do. 25% said no, and the other 25 said they use the native Office 365 capabilities to back up. So very interesting results. What, Archana, what do you make of those results? Is it surprising or?
Yeah, it's much better than what we found late in 2020, that it was just under 30%, right? So It fills my heart with hope to see that more people are looking at backing up data, because it's absolutely at the center of your business productivity. So take control of your data. But we still have a long way to go. Especially it scares me when a quarter of respondents say that, yeah, they're using native capabilities. It's a great starting point, but a lot of things are changing right now. You are getting the attention of your business stakeholders. So be the architects of that data resilience. So take control of your data wherever it is.
Great. And I think that was an excellent takeaway, actually, if we want to do a quick round of takeaways. Did you have anything to add as a takeaway, Archana?
No, it's just good hygiene, good practice. So if you're backing up data on premises, think why you're not doing it for your SaaS applications, and you will automatically think about the risks and start thinking about backing it up. Absolutely.
Brian, any takeaways from you, sir?
No, I too am glad to hear that people are starting to catch on to the idea that Microsoft 365 data needs to be backed up.
Absolutely. Corinne, any parting thoughts on your side?
I mostly concur with everyone else, and if you're not already using Microsoft Office 365 and you plan on starting to use this should be a key part of your deployment process when you're moving to the cloud software as a service applications.
Absolutely. And please keep the questions coming in because we will be monitoring these post-event, but we do have 3 call to actions for you, some 3 key takeaways we'd like to leave you with. If we could get those on the screen. Okay, first we have the Microsoft Teams Backup Conversational Teams Backup ebook, which was actually written by Mr. Brian Posey here. And it talks a lot more detail than we're able to cover today about Microsoft Teams Backup. So we do hope you will give that a read. We'll give you a few moments to break out your QR code app and snap that. We also have a few other QR codes here on the next slide. We have actually a demo series. If you'd actually like to see this product in action, Veeam Backup from Microsoft Office 365, you'll get to see how it's installed, how to set up the backup, how to leverage the cloud for your backups. And of course, we do that every Wednesday. So go ahead and get scheduled in. Use the QR code there. And we have one final QR code for you to snap. So get ready. We have the download of Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 version 5. So this was our Microsoft Teams backup support. Really puts you in the driver's seat, gives you full control over that Teams data, and gives you really unmatched ability to restore and get granular e-discovery as well for your search capabilities. So go ahead and snap that QR. You can actually take a free 30-day trial, completely unlimited capabilities for 30 days. So we hope you'll give that a shot and see what it's all about. And I think with that, I'm going to just thank my panelists very, very much for joining us today. And I do hope everyone that was watching today thought this was helpful. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop those in and we will continue to answer those as the day goes on. So with that, I wish you a very happy Thursday and we wish you a goodbye. Have a great day.